Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, Storm Dragon Veldora engaged in a mythological battle of epic proportions against the destruction giant god TenSura in his Ashura form. Veldora's growth was astounding, demonstrating calm strategy, bold gambles, and sharp insight. Not only did he defeat TenSura, but he also helped him solve a problem that had troubled him for millennia. TenSura and his brothers transformed from destruction gods into natural guardians of the world. However, just as everything seemed to settle, Scorched Dragon Veldora suddenly appeared with shocking news. Milim had attacked Heaven Tower. In this episode, we will witness the TenSura brothers' anger over Feldway's deception and see the inspiring moment when Luminous unites the world's strongest forces to face the impending arrival of the evil god Ivarage. Meanwhile, Zelanus initiates his own actions, and Vega and Dino's team also have their plans. So, let's get started. Upon hearing Veldora's news about Milim's attack on Heaven Tower, the TenSura brothers were deeply shocked. Fen reacted most intensely. He roared at Veldora, accusing her of trying to deceive him. Fen believed in Feldway and claimed that Feldway never mentioned an attack on Heaven Tower. Fen's sole focus was defeating TenSura and advancing on Rubrios. Veldora, growing impatient, angrily snapped at Fen, stating that everything she said was already a fact. This only agitated Fen further, as he insisted that Feldway had never said anything about targeting Heaven Tower. However, Fen quickly realized that while Feldway hadn't explicitly mentioned attacking Heaven Tower, he also hadn't made any guarantees or promises against it. Veldora, losing her temper with Fen's outbursts, raised her voice and told him he was being too loud. She then pointed out that if Feldway intended to destroy the Divine Tree, it should have been obvious that he would also target Heaven Tower. Fen was left speechless. In truth, only a few people had anticipated this part of Feldway's plan, and Veldora was one of them. That's why she had immediately gone to Heaven Tower, where Sue's parallel existence was, instead of continuing to assist Rimuru, to help evacuate the citizens. Thanks to Veldora's powerful intervention, she safeguarded the giants there. Heaven Tower's outer walls were able to withstand Milim's Drago Nova, and with Veldora reinforcing the tower using her star barrier, they successfully fended off Milim's attack. TenSura, upon hearing Veldora's words, finally felt some relief. However, Veldora's next statement once again threw everyone into turmoil. Although Heaven Tower and the giant women and children were safe, the gate connecting the central world and the other world had likely been destroyed, which meant that a great catastrophe was imminent. TenSura understood that the looming catastrophe was none other than the evil god Ivarage. Fen, too, realized that Feldway had used him from the beginning to draw TenSura away from Heaven Tower. By removing TenSura from his post, Feldway's subsequent plans had fallen into place with frightening efficiency. Fen continued to press Veldora, demanding to know why she had shared all of this information with them. Veldora cast a cold glance at Fen, saying she couldn't care less about the three brothers. She was only here to consult with Luminous and to check on her stupid brother. Hearing this, Veldora began trembling. Veldora continued, explaining that once the red darkness cleared, Veldora would head to the Divine Tree to prevent Feldway from using the controlled Milim to destroy it again. Meanwhile, Luminous would be responsible for receiving the refugees from Heaven Tower. As the red darkness receded, the previously barren and desert landscape had transformed into a lush forest, comparable to the Jura Great Forest. While this might have been a good thing, the issue was that Luminous City had also been swallowed by the expanding forest, making it seem like Veldora had overdone it. Luminous, who had just woken up, saw this scene and approached Veldora with a complicated expression. With a mix of anger, irritation, and a hint of tsundere, she demanded an explanation for what had happened. Though her face remained beautiful and smiling, the throbbing vein on her forehead signaled that Veldora was in imminent danger. Veldora frantically insisted that this couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be his perfect plan to clear his name. Not only had he saved Luminous from a crisis, but he had also turned her and TenSura's territories into prosperous lands. No matter how you looked at it, it couldn't have gone any better. However, in retrospect, it seemed that Veldora may have overdone things a bit. While it was an improvement over the firestorm that had destroyed the city 2,000 years ago, this time, by using a sea of trees, he had caused nearly the same level of destruction. Veldora nervously stepped back, only to realize his sister Velgrind was standing right behind him, leaving him trapped. In a flustered attempt to save himself, Veldora insisted that things weren't as they seemed and that there had been a lot of careful planning involved. He promised to give Luminous a thorough explanation later, then dashed away with a speed even faster than when he had fought de Gruel, escaping both Luminous and Velgrind's presence. Though Luminous grumbled in frustration, she made no move to chase after Veldora. She was more concerned about the fact that, upon waking, Velgrind was present, which signaled that something serious had happened. Although she had only been asleep for a brief 10 minutes, it seemed that all sorts of events had transpired in that time. Her eyes flicked from the tree-bound forms of de Gruel and his brothers to Velgrind, who appeared to be fully aware of everything that had taken place. Faced with Luminous inquiry, Velgrind shrugged. Although she regretted not being able to prevent Rimura's disappearance, she believed she had made the right choice by protecting de Gruel's people. Velgrind herself had once been struck by Feldway's Chronos saltation and had successfully returned with Rimura's help. Therefore, she believed that Rimura would surely find a way back to this world. For now, she chose not to worry about Rimuru, focusing instead on taking the best possible actions. The first thing Velgrind tasked Luminous with was preparing to accept refugees from de Gruel's side. Using her skill, space-time connection, Velgrind linked Heaven Tower's parallel existence with Rubrios, enabling the large-scale migration of refugees. Incidentally, Luminous City had been severely damaged by the overgrown trees caused by Veldora's actions. De Gruel, being impoverished, was certainly in no position to pay reparations. Luckily, Luminous assumed that Rimuru would send people to help with the repairs in the future, so although she was angry with Veldora, it wasn't a major issue. The trio of Veldora, Velgrind, and Luminous seemed remarkably calm about Rimuru's disappearance. Despite understanding the urgency of the situation, they fully believed that Rimuru would return safely, a stark contrast to the panic that was occurring within the Labyrinth. As for de Gruel, he was now deeply remorseful and anxious. On the one hand, he was grateful to Veldora, Velgrind, and Luminous, but on the other hand, he was furious at Feldway for using him to further his plan to destroy the world. Fen felt the same way. However, the de Gruel brothers were no longer in any condition to provide assistance in battle. Luminous and Ultima, meanwhile, were still clearly upset with de Gruel's actions, but Velgrind brushed it off, advising them to let bygones be bygones and encouraging Luminous not to stay angry. For the first time, Luminous found that Veldora and Velgrind, as siblings, shared certain similarities, especially in their seemingly carefree attitudes toward the destruction of cities. After Velgrind relayed the news of the damage to Heaven Tower, a sense of unease spread among everyone. In fact, Velgrind's space-time connection allowed them to sense the ominous aura from above Heaven Tower. It was the evil god, Ivarage. Fortunately, according to Velgrind's estimate, there was still a decent amount of time before Ivarage's full arrival. However, even the cryptids that served as a vanguard were not to be underestimated. Each one was at least on par with Charybdis, a disaster-class creature, which was far beyond what humanity could handle. Moreover, the number of cryptids was predicted to be enormous, with a conservative estimate of over 1,000. While Velgrind herself would focus on confronting the imminent Ivarage, the vast number and strength of the cryptids descending upon Central World posed a dire threat. If they spread out, they would wreak havoc across the world. Even though Luminous, Xian, and others were incredibly powerful, overcoming this crisis would require uniting all of the world's strongest warriors. To address the growing crisis, Velgrind made a firm decision to involve Masayuki in the battle, who was currently in Ingracia. Although she didn't want to put Masayuki in danger, she knew that his power to bring limitless luck to their side would have a significant impact on the upcoming war. If they did nothing, the world would perish, so Velgrind decided to take a chance. Similarly, Hinata Sakaguchi, who was also in Ingracia, rushed to the battlefield. Upon hearing that de Gruel had attacked Rubrios, Hinata had barely managed to restrain herself from leaving to continue protecting Ingracia. However, after learning of Rimura's disappearance, she could no longer sit still. Hinata couldn't believe that Rimuru, who always wore a relaxed expression no matter what happened, had lost. Rimuru's presence always provided a sense of reassurance to everyone because they believed he could solve any problem. But this time, it was clear they could no longer rely on Rimuru. Hinata realized that they had to take action themselves. She left only the minimal defense forces to protect the Western nations and brought all the elite warriors to the front lines. Of course, Hinata believed that Rimuru would return, so she felt she had to protect the world until then, otherwise Rimuru would surely mock her. Hinata returned to her former cold, icy demeanor. Luminous noticed this but didn't mention it. Indeed, everyone had become too dependent on Rimuru, something Luminous had increasingly come to understand after Rimuru's disappearance. Soon, a discussion began among the group, though it did not include de Gruel and his brothers, who were now fused with the giant tree and unable to move. The final conclusion was to have Luminous, as a god, issue a divine decree, revealing the truth to the world's people and asking for their cooperation in facing the crisis together. They knew that this would likely cause widespread panic, but they had no choice. Their goal was to gather as much military strength as possible and leave it to the leaders of each country to manage the people's reactions. With that, the plan was set into motion. Without any warning, Luminous' image appeared in the skies above the nations of the world. The sudden appearance left everyone who looked up into the sky astonished. Luminous began with a striking and explosive statement, declaring herself to be Luminous Valentine, ruler of the Holy Empire Rubrios, a god, and also a demon lord. This announcement shocked everyone. It wasn't every day that people heard their deity reveal that they were also a demon lord. Naturally, this caused many to question their faith. But Luminous didn't care about that. She continued, saying that the world was facing an unprecedented crisis. She vowed, in the name of a god, and with the pride of the Octagram demon lords, that she would not run from the battle. She promised to protect the world until her last breath, fighting alongside the other demon lords. Luminous made another shocking statement, speaking so boldly that it seemed as if she were trying to incite chaos. But oddly enough, it was this very chaos that brought calm to the people. The beautiful, divine figure floating in the sky showed no signs of deceit. As they gazed at her godlike beauty, no one doubted her words. Yes, beauty is justice. This beautiful goddess surely could not be lying. Luminous continued her speech, stating that in the face of a world-ending crisis, running away was futile. The only option was to fight. As a demon lord, Luminous declared that she would never bow to her opponents. At the same time, she emphasized that she was not fighting alone. As Luminous spoke, the image on the screen began to cycle through, showing the figures of the world's strongest, Demon Lord Luminous herself, Primordial Purple Ultima, Saint Hinata Sakaguchi, Emperor Masayuki, and True Dragon Velgrind. Seeing these images, people were convinced that this was Luminous' declaration of victory. The citizens of Ingracia were especially affected, as they had just witnessed Emperor Masayuki's heroic deeds. His power had left a lasting impression on their minds. People around the world who understood the terrifying power of true dragons naturally realized what Velgrind's presence meant. This was the Empress whom even the mighty storm dragon did not dare to defy, a true supreme being of the world. The most surprising figure was Ultima. Her cute appearance quickly garnered her a large following, albeit a group of fools deceived by her looks. However, Ultima herself, striking adorable poses, wasn't entirely innocent in this. Finally, there was Hinata, Riberios's strongest knight. With even the god Luminous joining the fight, the onlookers became convinced that this battle could not end in defeat. Oblivious to the public's thoughts, Luminous continued to rally the people, declaring that this was the time to defend the world. Those strong enough to avoid merely surviving off the sacrifices of countless brave souls now had the chance to showcase their courage and strength. Luminous' speech had an unexpected result. Seeing those sacred and majestic figures at the pinnacle of the world filled people with excitement and fervor. Seizing the moment, Luminous called out to the leaders of the nations, reminding them that their elevated positions were thanks to their people. Now was the time for them to fulfill their duties as nobles and kings, not to run away but to lead their people properly. She also addressed all those with strength, saying that her domain provided a place for a final, decisive battle. This was the moment to dedicate their lives for victory and to protect this world and its planet. The resolve of Luminous and the other heroes sparked an outpouring of roars and cheers from people across the globe. Everyone braced themselves for the coming battle. Even without using any special powers, Luminous had united humanity as if by enchantment, which was a testament to her personal charisma. This speech would later be known as the Doomsday Declaration. In response, emergency meetings were held in various nations, and after retaining the minimum necessary forces, they sent reinforcements to assist Luminous. King Gazel led 500 Pegasus Knights, Hinata commanded 300 Holy Knight Order members, Lewis brought fewer than 400 Blood Knights, and Calgurio, along with his deputy Minutes, led a new generation of the Imperial Guardians. They all made their way to Heaven Tower. The main force, however, consisted of more than 1,000 A-level warriors selected from the Chain Giant's army. Degruel's eldest son, Degura, was appointed commander-in-chief, with Basara acting as his deputy. Since Degruel and his brothers were no longer able to fight, Degruel designated Degura as the new Giant King, who would lead the Giants into the future. Thus, the Giants had completed their generational transition. In a short time, nearly 3,000 A-level and above warriors gathered beneath Heaven Tower. On a side note, Xian suggested that Adelman's undead army could be used as bait, but due to the bizarre effects of Storm Dragon Veldora's fertile paradox, all of the undead army soldiers regained their physical bodies. It seemed that Veldora had restored their undead status as an abnormal condition. Adelman himself was also restored to his physical form, appearing as he did when fused with Venti. However, nobody expected Veldora to completely revert Adelman back into a living human. Even the skeletal dragon Venti was transformed into an adorable small dragon sitting on Adelman's shoulder. Ultima, intrigued by the absurdity of the situation, expressed great interest. Veldora had once again astonished everyone with his unpredictable surprises, rivaling even Rimuru-sama in outrageousness. Although Fertile Paradox nullified abnormal conditions and restored everyone's injuries and stamina, there was one exception, Xian. Despite the effect of Fertile Paradox, Xian remained in an incomplete state. Even this powerful ability could not restore her full strength, proving that Xian's magical reserves had drastically increased. Thus, preparations for the upcoming battle proceeded in an orderly manner. Shifting perspective to Insect Lord Zelanus, Zelanus was in the midst of healing his wounds. These injuries were not from his battle with Milim, but rather the result of a forced restore life. The death of Insect Queen Peliad had been an unforeseen event, but while it disrupted his plans slightly, it was not outside Zelanus's overall scheme. All Insectars, including Peliad, were designed to belong to Zelanus. Their birth, growth, acquired wisdom, power, and experience were all intended to be collected upon their death. Initially, Zelanus had hoped to channel all of this power back into Peliad, turning her into an immensely powerful being. However, due to Peliad's unexpected death, all of this energy flowed directly back into Zelanus himself, forcing his restore life. This was the true might of Zelanus's ultimate skill, Lord of Life. Although Zelanus had once hoped Zes might surpass him, he knew deep down that this was unlikely. If it ever did happen, Zelanus had planned to willingly transfer his Lord of Life to Zes. Unfortunately, Zes had also become Zelanus's food during their recent battle. As Zelanus felt the surge of power swelling within him, he experienced a rare sense of exhilaration. Compared to his strength at birth, he had grown tens of times more powerful, now boasting a level that far exceeded his previous self in the battle with Milim. His existence had breached the 100 million mark, elevating him beyond even the true dragons. But even this was not enough. Zelanus still had relatives alive in this world. Now was the time to devour their power and reach even higher realms. Zelanus began to take action. Shifting the perspective to Vega and Dino, the leader of this operation was Vega, and Dino and the others had no choice but to follow his orders. Due to Feldway's control, Dino, who only wanted to escape with Pico and Gracia, found himself unable to defy commands. Reluctantly, he endured his intense disgust for Vega, inwardly griping and complaining. Vega's plan only further solidified Dino's opinion that the man was an idiot. Vega's strategy was simple: attack head-on and defeat everyone. Dino couldn't help but retort that Ramorous' labyrinth was practically indestructible, and the inhabitants could resurrect after death as many times as needed. There was no way to simply conquer the labyrinth like that. Pico and Gracia nodded in agreement, explaining that there were opponents within who were just as strong as they were, and with the ability to infinitely resurrect, they could fight recklessly without fear of consequences. Victory was impossible under such circumstances. Pico and Gracia hadn't gone all out in their previous fight with Kamara and Gelb, but they still acknowledged their opponent's solid strength. Vega, however, insisted that his plan was to just keep defeating them, even after they resurrected. Dino was dumbfounded, unable to comprehend Vega's logic. Vega went on to say that if it didn't work, he could simply devour them. Without a body, they couldn't resurrect. Dino grew suspicious. Technically speaking, Ramorous' authority governed souls, meaning that as long as the soul retained information, it should be possible to restore the body. Vega dismissed this, saying it didn't matter. He could just steal their power, so even if they resurrected, they'd be easy to defeat again. Dino grew increasingly frustrated. He and Vega were never on the same wavelength. Dino pointed out that the labyrinth's defenders were extremely powerful and not easily defeated. Vega continued his one-sided reasoning, claiming that if Dino and the others were worried, he could create evil dragon beasts. As long as there were enough materials to feed on, he could produce 4 evil dragon beasts. Dino nearly choked in disbelief, internally screaming at Vega's utter inability to synchronize with his own logic. Yet due to Feldway's Lord of Justice's influence, Dino had no choice but to follow this fool's orders. Seeing that Dino was still unmotivated, Vega suggested that he could use his Lord of Evil Dragons to swallow the entire labyrinth. This time, even my Furuki was shocked, and the others all expressed disbelief at Vega's increasingly absurd declarations. Vega countered that he was incredibly strong, and the labyrinth wouldn't pose any problem. As he spoke, Vega pushed open the gates of the labyrinth. Dino and the rest had no choice but to follow along, with my Furuki muttering that if things got too bad, she could always use her Lord of Topography to escape. Things continued to progress in the direction Dino feared most. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, Vega began to find it increasingly troublesome. The usual number of monsters lurking within had drastically decreased, replaced by a higher number of traps than usual. Dino, with his keen senses, realized that Ramorous had likely already seen through their plan. Oddly enough, this brought Dino some relief. After all, Dino was actually a spy for Rimuru, and his aim during the earlier strategy meeting was to allow Vega's outlandish plans to be picked up by Ramorous and the others. It seemed that everything was proceeding as planned. However, Dino still felt irritated. The reason being that Vega was simply too reckless. He insisted on testing even the most obvious traps, which drastically slowed the team's progress. After what felt like an eternity, they finally broke through to the 50th layer of the labyrinth. Waiting for them on the lower floors were the most advanced scientific weapons, fully prepared for their arrival. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth's bottom-tier command center, Benimaru and the others were closely observing the movements of Vega's team on their display screens. Currently displayed were the enemy's existence points. Mai Furuki's existence points totaled 1.66 million, and with the mythical level longbow on her back adding another 1 million, her total came to 2.66 million. She was a rare user of transference abilities. Next was Pico, with 1.89 million existence points, plus her weapon's additional power, bringing her total to 2.89 million. Gracia had 2.44 million existence points and wielded 2 mythical-grade weapons, a long sword and a round shield, giving her a total of 4.44 million existence points. Dino's existence points were 2.26 million, with his mythical sword Vega contributing an additional 2.2 million, resulting in a combined total of 4.46 million. However, Labyrinth remarked that, based on her intuition, Dino seemed completely unmotivated. The biggest threat was Vega, with an astonishing 17.37 million existence points. Everyone was clearly shocked by this number, except for Diablo, who maintained his usual smile. He offered to handle Vega personally, given his high power level. Benimura hesitated, saying that the time wasn't right yet. Vega's full abilities hadn't been revealed, and last time, TenSura had let him escape. This time, they needed to proceed cautiously and make sure to defeat him completely. Benimura noted that they at least needed to separate Vega from Furuki, who had transference abilities, as Vega seemed to be attempting to consume the labyrinth. Benimura asked Labyrinth how likely this was, and Labyrinth nonchalantly replied that it was impossible. However, she quickly added that they shouldn't be careless. Her investigation had revealed that Vega was indeed continuously attempting it. His magical bacteria were starting to cover the walls between layers. Although his efforts had repeatedly failed, Vega was persistently trying, and the weaker monsters in the lower layers had already begun to be devoured by him, slowly accumulating power. Hearing this, Benimura felt a headache coming on. Nevertheless, the strategy was clear. They needed to isolate Vega from the others before he could grow stronger, and eliminate him as soon as possible. Alright, that's all for this video. In this episode, we saw the power of the women, with Veldora, Luminous, and others living up to their titles during critical moments. Of course, even though it was only briefly mentioned in the original text, Ultima's cute act gaining her a lot of fans was a particularly memorable moment. Venti transforming into a cute little dragon raises the question of whether she will continue to grow or remain in this small dragon form. Vega's idiocy and recklessness were also on full display, and this team remains as disorganized as ever. In our next episode, we'll see the growing tensions within Vega and Dino's group, as well as how Vega, the absolute fool, inadvertently discovers a way to infiltrate the labyrinth. Vega's power will further increase. The next episode will be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.